Hello, everybody. Good evening. Welcome to all our visitors, artists, students, faculty, and the community that came for this very interesting symposium, and of course to see the works upstairs for the last time this weekend. We're going to be closing this fabulous exhibit of masterpieces, and it's been a real thrill to have them here. I'm Carol Damian. I'm the director of the Frost Art Museum, and it really is a pleasure to see everybody here. I just wanted to welcome you. I want to be sure that after the symposium, if you have not seen the portraits, or even if you have, that you return to the museum upstairs. And also there's another exhibit, Ivan Navarro, who is an artist from Chile, who has a very interesting exhibit of works made from fluorescent tubes. So it's all about light. So please go and visit that. We also have lots of things going on at the Frost. On Saturday, we're going to welcome the director of the National Museum of the American Indian from the Smithsonian Institution. So he will be speaking at 4 o'clock. And then right after that, we have a reception for a Cuban American artist whose works will be exhibited on the 3rd floor. And so you can come, have a glass of wine, enjoy an early Saturday evening with us, and meet some interesting people. And again, this is sort of our farewell to this extraordinary exhibition. So I would like to introduce Annette, who will begin the program. Thank you, Annette.
Thank you, Dr. Damian, and thank you all for coming out on a Wednesday evening in the middle of the week. Welcome to the Frost, and the first of several symposia that will be offered here on different themes at the Frost this year. So we're kicking off the new year at the very start of the new year, really kind of the cusp. Our courses just started this week, so I know the faculty members in here are kind of exhausted from prepping and our nerves of teaching the first week. This evening we have a group of speakers who are going to address themes that are woven into the remarkable exhibit, Seminole Portraits. I'm Annette Fromm. I'm the coordinator of the Graduate Certificate of Museum Studies here, and I curated the exhibit, working jointly with staff at the Atatürk Museum. We have 2 professors from 2 different disciplines at FIU who've joined us. And what I'll do is I'll introduce the 2 professors, they'll speak, and then we have a really extraordinary opportunity in which 3 Florida Seminole artists are here, and we'll have a moderated discussion with them after the 2 lectures. Dennis Weidman is an associate professor in the Department of Global and Sociocultural Studies here at FIU. He's an anthropologist who studies in Native American studies, ethnohistory, ecological anthropology, and applied anthropology. He teaches undergraduate and graduate anthropology courses including Native American ethnology, Native American religions, ethnicity, applied anthropology, and this semester, Native American films at the same time as my class, so I can't go watch movies. He's published widely on these topics. He'll be speaking about the genesis and growth of the fine art movement of Native Americans here in the 20th and 21st centuries, and the place of Seminole artists. Alpesh Patel is also with us. He's an assistant professor of contemporary art and theory in the School of Art and Art History. He brings to the discussion approaches to viewing portraits as they represent the identity of the sitters, as the exhibit is an exhibit of portraits. Much of his work as an art historian has addressed issues of identity in visual arts. He's published and spoken widely on this topic. And as I said, we'll close with a discussion with the 3 artists who've joined us also. So please join me to welcome Dennis Weidman.
Good evening, everyone. I think that's okay. Lights in the back bothering anyone back there? See clearly? I find it an honor to be here with you tonight. This is a subject that I've been involved with for many decades, and it's an honor to be here and speak with our Native representatives here too. So to be here on your lawn, be presenting this is an honor for me. And so I'm going to be speaking on Native American portraits, identity, and visual sovereignty. And Annette asked me to talk on the subject. She said, well, don't necessarily talk about the portraits that are on exhibit, but talk about Native American art portraits and the development of Native American art. So this is a grand view of Native American art. Put the perspective of the exhibit in the context, cultural context. And so my purpose is to illustrate the great time depth and historical continuity of Native art in North America from 4,000 years ago to the present. I'm going to emphasize portraits of Indians by Indians. We're going to show you some drawings, paintings, and sculptures, and highlight notable Native artists and their cultural context. I'll discuss the importance of visual sovereignty in upholding Native American identity. Sovereignty is a major issue among tribal peoples today in empowering them self-governance, control over their own properties and resources and membership. And here I'm going to talk about visual sovereignty in the sense of control of their own production of their own visual media in presenting their own images and stories to the public. And so having the power to create media for multiple audiences while defining and refining their own cultural values, symbols, and identity. So this is, let me introduce you to Snapping Turtle. This is a Snapping Turtle by Kevin Red Star. Kevin Red Star is a leading artist. He's been working for decades now, and he's a very mature, well-known artist from Crow Agency, Crow Tribe of Montana. And this is actually the winning portrait painting, overall painting, of the winner of the President's Choice Williams Award at Gilcrease American Art Exhibition in Scale Sale in Tulsa this year. Gilcrease Museum is one of the premier museums in Tulsa, Oklahoma, in all the world, on Western art and Native American art. So Kevin Red Star is honored this year being a premier winner. And so I thought I'd show that to you because this is the latest portraiture that's being presented to the public by an indigenous Native artist today. And so let's look at this a little bit more closely. My talk is to identify and to share with you how artists, Native artists produce art empowered with visual sovereignty and what kind of elements. Is that my sound or?
If there was anything on there.
That's not my sound. It's coming from upstairs. Okay. I'm trying to illustrate to you how Native artists produce art expressing tribal beliefs and symbolism. So here we have a painting, a portrait of Snapping Turtle and the Plains Indians, notable for horseback hunting buffalo. The Crow are a representative tribe in Montana, representing that group. And so Kevin Red Star produces images that are very tribally specific. And so a Crow, looking at that painting, would identify it in a very specific way. And so there's cultural elements represented. And one would be, there were buffalo hunters years ago. They have buffalo herds today. But the buffalo headdress, buffalo hair, and then the horns, and eagle feathers. And another thing that is very important to the Crow is the sun. For years, decades, thousands of years, they've practiced the ceremony, the dance, the religion, their life, their cosmology, based around the sun dance. They are practitioners of the sun dance even today. And so that is the kind of the element, of cultural element that we see in portraits, paintings and sculptures by Native peoples, representing very specific nuances. So if you're a non-Indian and you don't know the cultural context, you see it as an art piece, but it's really interpreting a symbol, a set of beliefs, and also a whole narrative and story about that. It's another form of storytelling. And it produces individual identities in that individuals who are Crow identify with the paintings, and it carries on a cultural message and shares with the children, and so it becomes identified as an identity of the culture of the Crow. Kevin Red Star has been doing this a number of years. His paintings are classic. There's some that portray pure Crow identity. And So this is Sweet Corn Woman, another painting, which is one of his most recent paintings. And I'll talk about her in a moment, but that's a typical Crow. Someone who is our Seminole people here today, looking at that, you most likely will be able to identify it very specifically to Crow, just because of the things she's wearing. The red and black, red and blue broadcloth dress with elk teeth and a beaded belt, very Crow. So Crow Fair, where each year they dance and they celebrate with this Crow identity. So this kind of painting is being represented very specifically for Crow ethnicity. And so Red Star, he's a master artist and visual historian for his native Crow culture. He attended the reservation grade school, where Crow students were denied association with their language, religion, and cultural heritage. Through the process of federal government, U.S. federal government, through schools and missionaries, they started placing, capturing, warfare, extinction of Native peoples. Part of the reservation system was to educate Native peoples. They instituted a kind of schools which then left out the Native culture. So Red Star was brought up in that kind of school where they were denied association with language, religion, and cultural heritage. But then he was admitted to the newly established Institute of American Indian Arts in Santa Fe, New Mexico in 1972. That's the leading school now to teach Native American artists. It's the premier school. He was one of the first students. And there he was encouraged to explore his history and culture through modern art techniques. He works primarily in acrylic, ink, and collage. And so there's over 566 tribes in the United States recognized by the U.S. government. It's 5.2 million people, 1.7% of the U.S. population. And through this history of Europeans coming to this continent and exploration, taking of resources, dispersal of Native peoples to the west, the Crow and the Seminole, where the federal government was forced assimilation, trying to make them non-Indian, make them like Europeans. And so it's now in a period of self-governance, and sovereignty is the word, where Native people since the 1930s are now empowered to govern themselves, govern their own resources, and their own membership, and much more empowerment these days. And so there's a great diversity of cultures and art forms throughout all these 566 tribal governments recognized by the federal government. But it's all over North America, wherever they were, in different environments and resources, there were different forms of media, different kinds of things that could be pulled together to create art. And so they produce art with distinct symbols made from the resources in their particular environment. And here we have Kachina dolls made from cottonwood trees. We have a Bella Coola masks made from cedar trees. We have sand paintings of the Navajo made from sand and mineral put on the ground. And then after the ceremony and the production of it, it's then dispersed back to the ground. And then the Inuit, all the way up on the North Arctic, produced from bone and antler. This is a whale bone. So there's a great diversity of art forms. So where does portraiture and drawings all come in? I'm going to show you the transition from traditional ancient culture to more present. And so the ancient portraits of the oldest ones, some of the oldest ones, are found at Poverty Point in Louisiana. These are human figures. They're hand-molded clay and then fired. So you can see the human figures here. These are dated 4,000 years ago, 3,350. This is not only just this small little town, this is actually a city. It's 3/4 of a mile in diameter. These mounds, the homes are on the mounds. It's around a circle and a pole in the center. And this mound here is in the shape of a bird, and it's 72 feet tall. This is 4,000 years ago, comparable with any of the other pyramids in the world. And so the cultural themes that we can see that's represented here in this very early time of development and humans living here, Native peoples, the cultural theme is a circle. This was once a full circle. It's eroded from the river. And the bird. The emphasis of the bird is going to be repetitive, continue on to the present. And so here's 2,500 years ago, the woodland era. This is a pipestone, carved pipestone. Pipestone is a soft kind of sandstone found in the Minnesota area. And it was traded widely. And so the Adena culture at this time had large mounds, large populations, and produced all this form of fine art in all kinds of carved effigies of animals and humans, and also primarily focused on smoking and a pipe. And so this is actually a pipe. And then 1,500 years ago to 550 years ago, we then have the Mississippian era. And this is a grand time for Native North Americans. Population increases. This is the Spiro Mound in eastern Oklahoma. The largest collection of art for Native Americans for the Mississippian period was found here. Here you can see a carved bauxite, 10 inches tall human figure. And then here's the engraved shells. This is a whelk shell that's collected along the Gulf of Mexico, and this is very big. You know, these, we don't find these anymore. They're little tiny shells. All the big ones have been harvested. But you can see the lines that were drawn on there, and this is all engraved in size on the shell. And so if you look carefully, this is a human figure with an arm and legs and a belt and wing has feathers on the arms and has a headdress. And then here's a copper sheet with Rupus designs. This is hammered on the reverse side. It's 11 inches tall. Rupus means that they hammered the copper flat, then they hammered on the back side to form the characteristics. So you can see this is a portrait. 1300 AD. Those are brass ear spools. And if we go across, this is the western side of the Mississippian era. This is a grand area, region, all of the southeast, extending all the way up into the Great Lakes. Mississippian period, grand mounds, and this form of art with those kind of characters were actually dispersed. Some of them even come down into Florida. Crystal River is one of the major sites here in Florida, and it's debatable, but some people even say that it's a Mississippian mound that was down in Key Largo. So you can see that we have this grand region of sharing of ideas and cultural ideas. And so moving to the eastern side of the Mississippian era, over in Okmulgee, Georgia, is Etowah, very near Atlanta. This is 800 to 650 years ago. And this is one of those whelk shells also, but instead of being on the outside, it's on the inside. And the whelk is so large that this is about 10 inches tall. But once again, you can see the human figure with the feathers and the headdress. So this is a carved, engraved shell gorget. And so as the Europeans settled on the eastern coast, and through warfare and extermination and disease, the populations were just decreased and disrupted. A lot of people were forced west in Oklahoma and other places. But during that time, we actually find a fluorescence of culture on the plains. The plains really wasn't well inhabited during the pre-European times. There were foot people, pedestrians. But then we get the horse reintroduced by the Spanish. So once the horse was introduced, all the peoples who lived around the plains, bands, clans, would move out on the plains to hunt the buffalo. So the Crow is that story. The Crow were actually, they're probably even related back to Hopewellian people, agriculturalists, but they moved out onto the plains. And so they brought those cultural traditions with them. But that's a very mobile society. All the things that they had, they could break very easily. So pottery, things like that, things that were heavy they didn't carry with them. It's their clothing, it's their tents, it's their shields made out of buffalo, which they then transform their art to. And so this is a shield with a human figure. They painted on teepees. And so what I'm going to talk about here is because of this transition of pictorial art on the plains is so clear and related to this topic of portrait. So I'm going to show you a transition from this Kiowa buffalo painting all the way up into the present now. All right. And so this is a pictorial annual calendar of the Kiowa depicting 1833 to 1892, painted on buffalo hide. This is a communal effort. It wasn't done by any one individual. It was done by a group. And each year they painted another image on there in order to identify what the year was. It was a way for them to remember and to remember their stories and translate back to the current people what things were happening in the past. So every year is represented by a figure related to a story or a narrative. And so once the Kiowa and the Plains Indians were forced on the reservations in Oklahoma, many of the Kiowa resisted that, and some of them died because they just didn't want to do that. But there was about 28 of them which resisted that once they were on the reservation, and the U.S. government put them in jail. They put them in jail in St. Augustine, Florida, in Fort Marion, and so in Fort Marion, they then gave them ledgers and pencils. So they transferred painting on buffalo hides just to a different medium, to paper. And so that's this transition over to more modern art form. And so they came back, shared that with other members, and so this is the next generation. Silverhorn is the most famous artist on the plains. Thousands and thousands of representations on teepees, shields, ledger books are associated with him. This is colored pencil. And so, and this is in the Chicago Field Museum. I actually took this picture. You can see it's a book. This is a book. And this happens to be, I published on this years ago. Early Kiowa Peyote Ritual and Symbolisms, the 1891 drawing books of Silverhorn, was published in the American Indian Art Magazine, which is the leading publication for Native American art. I published that with Candace Green, who's now a curator at the Smithsonian Institution. But if we look at this article I wrote, we're studying the Native American church and peyotism. This is the leader of a peyote ceremony. He's sitting on the ground next to the altar. He has an eagle fan, a rattle, and a staff. And he's dressed, in very detailed clothing. And so that kind of a drawing is representing the details of the individual. You don't see many great details out behind him. It's just the individual details. And then the next generation of artists in the 1920s and 30s are known as the Kiowa Six artists. They're prominent in the development of contemporary Indian painting in the early Oklahoma School of Work. These are their names: Spencer Assad, James Kia, Jack Hokia, Steve Mokolt, Lois Smokey, and Monroe Soki. This is a watercolor applied with stencils by Stephen Mokolt. He is actually the grandnephew of Silverhorn, direct kin relationship in the artistic tradition. All of these people studied at the University of Oklahoma in the late 1920s. Professor Oscar Jacobson promoted their work through international exhibitions in Europe and a limited edition portfolio. Jacobson made Native American art internationally famous, notable, and collectible. That then produced more people wanting to buy Native American art. And so even here with Stephen Moko's painting in 1921, you can see not too much concern with the background, focusing on the portrait and the detailed cultural emphasis on the outfits. And each one of these items is very, very specific Kiowa. Even the little silverwork pendants that are hanging from the hair is Kiowa silverwork. So a Kiowa would definitely just look at that and know it's very tribally identifiable. And so another Saya Spencer, this is one of his paintings. I thought I'd give you a big picture so you could see a little more detail. And so this is this is a self-portrait, 1929. So this is a watercolor applied with stencils. And so you can see that they focus on activities and stories and portraits of individuals, not necessarily named individuals, but representative individuals. And once again, we have dance. It's a great performance and art form for Native people. The Kiowa, Comanche, and Apache of the Southern Plains are notable for starting the intertribal powwows. And the fancy dance, feather dance, shawl dance, all that we see of contemporary Indian culture for Pan-Indian. If you go to Seminole Tribal Fair, you can see usually representatives there from this. And so you can see once again that the feathers on the arm, there's a bustle in the back, bells. This is intertribal powwow outfit. And so in the 1950s to the 80s, one of the more famous Native artists is Woody Crumbo, Potawatomi from Oklahoma. This is a picture of him in his drawing studio. As a teenager, he attended Chilocco Indian boarding school in western Oklahoma. And so a boarding school is where they take the children out from their family, from wherever they may be, and put them into school for 9 months out of the year. So this is part of the assimilation process, try to take the Indian out of the Indian. And so he experienced that. But at that time, he became friends with the Kiowa artists. And so he works in oil, egg tempera, watercolor, sculpture, stained glass, and silk screen. And so here we have his portrait of Black Owl, a Cheyenne. This was painted in 1968. And you can see the great amount of detail that's been added here. It goes well beyond the earlier drawings that we just saw. Great attention to detail, fine lines, and even a perspective, a deep perspective. Still a representation of eagle feathers. And so Woody Crumbo became a master of silk screening, and he was able to produce multiple copies. So as the technology became available, silk screening, he could mass produce his art, and then he was able to distribute it. In this way, he maintained control of his own art, mass producing it and distributing it. So this is the empowerment I'm talking about, the visual sovereignty, where Native people are then empowered to produce their work and control their work. And this is a bigger picture, once again, just to give you a big idea of Woody Crumbo, his work. This is an eagle dancer, and you can see the great amount of detail and in the sense of movement. He's able to capture movement here. And so part of the tribal powwows are fancy dancers, and this is one of them. But an eagle dance is a specific dance where the feathers are along the arms. They portray an eagle. Isn't this reminiscent of the earlier shell gorgets that I was speaking of, and the bird mound back 4,000 years? Continuation of the emphasis of association with birds and nature, plants and animals. And then the 50s to 80s, we have a modern art that developed. More contemporary abstract art. So this is Oscar Howe, Dakota. He works in cassine and tempera paintings. One of his paintings are on display in the exhibit upstairs. A very small portrait of a Seminole man. He's most noted for this kind of art. And so that just, anybody have difficulty understanding what the art is? Let's look at a little detail. Here's his chin, facing up with his nose. Here's his arm. He has a stick and a wand, possibly ribbons on its arm, on the wand. Here's the eagle feathers. Here's the legs and the feet. And so instead of focusing on the detailed cultural details of the art, the beadwork, the leather work, he's actually focusing on the movements and the points at which the dancer is moving around. So it's a sense of portraying that vitality and that movement in this form of dance, the victory dance. And then in the 70s and 90s, we have R.C. Gorman. He's born on the Navajo Reservation in Arizona. He's one of the Southwest's best-known late 20th century artists. His signature works are oil pastel drawings of women. Some call him the Picasso of Indian artists. He's the leading artist in the early 1970s with the emergence of the New Indian art movement. And so here you can see his art in pastel, not concerned with the cultural detail of clothing, but the actual form, the human form, but it's still a native form with the image of the woman. And here's one of his, another piece. So here he's captured the essence of a woman, but it's